You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm an algorithmically generated SavageMick.
And I am an original Flesh and Blood Warlord Scarr.
Oh. Right, Dave, what are the prompts for today?
The prompts for today are AI-generated art, and that's the main one.
What's that got to do with role-playing, I hear you ask?
Well, the trick is in the word prompt, though, because it the way a lot of the at least the AI generating websites I've found work is that you give them prompts, written keywords or written description of what you want, and it will try its binary best to make what you want or it thinks you want. And
it's certainly. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
no, the results can be quite impressive. I've seen Midjourney spitting out, a scene as if painted by a renowned artist. As in, that style looks, if not exactly, as in it's in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, some of it could be mistaken for art. So my background, my professional background is in graphic design and illustration. I have a lot to say on this one, but more specifically, we should look at this from the point of view of AI generated art and the RPG community industry. What can we hope to glean from this? Revolution doesn't feel like quite enough of a term to describe what's happening, because I think we're about to see something truly seismic inflict itself upon the visual arts in general, and RPG art, I think, occupies a particularly interesting space here. If you stuck your nose into the world of AI generated art at all, you've probably seen at this point about 1 million cybergoth femme fatales or whimsical sort of fantasy prince/princesses, because it turns out that with an amazingly powerful tool, human imagination is still something that needs to be trained in terms of what it asks for.
Just a little bit. This episode actually comes at a fortuitous time because I realised that in my current bedtime reading, it actually features AI-generated art. It's an OSR supplement called Ashen Void, full of prompts, and random tables for a dark fantasy world, which the author apparently has been working on since the early 2010s. But the art credits are the author, but using Night Cafe Studio. Yeah, sorry, just to make sure that I have this correct. Yeah, Night Cafe Studio. So he quite rightly is noting that this is AI generated art, and it actually fits what he's doing. It looks warped and desolate, and it seems to fit the text pretty well. And
to use our earwords to sort of describe the eye thing, it's a very sort of Geiger-esque / Boschian landscapey stuff. There's twisted organic shapes and melting geographical features, things like that. There's a Polish artist whose name escapes me now, very heavily referenced in the Astartes shorts that blew up online a couple of years ago. I'll dig his name up during the course of this discussion.
Oh, is this the diesel punk stuff?
It's again kind of Geiger-esque, kind of nightmarish. But if you think too many limbs and not enough faces, then you're probably in the right arena. And this is what the inside of this book has sort of been populated with. It's, for OSR, not a bad layout job. I'm looking at a review on the Prince of Nothing blog, where he's covered it. He's done a review and he features quite a bit. They features quite a bit of the internal art. Okay, so if you're a one-man or woman or person creative team, art in RPGs has definitely been something that people have always struggled with. If you happen to be someone like Zach Sabbath or Runehammer, then you're sorted. You're naturally artistic, and you're also bloody good at mechanics and writing interesting prompts. Morkborg guy is probably the same, I think. I'm not sure, I'd have to look at the book, but I think Morkborg is largely the work, the typography, the layout, the artwork of one person.
Yeah, the typography and the art of the core book, as far as I know, are one guy. Rules are by another.
Now, if you're that kind of one-person band operation, that's a lot of instruments to play and be good at. But AI-generated or AI-assisted generation in art has lowered the barrier significantly, I think, for particular kinds of projects. And this Ashen Void is a perfect example, because while I've scrolled through a bunch of these examples of the artwork, there's not a face or a, let me say, coherent biology or physiology to be found, because that's not necessarily something that AI art is actually that good at the moment. But, it's a fast advancing field. So I think...
Isn't that a deliberate feature?
Yes and no. There's plenty of... If you stick with it, you can generate very good realistic artwork that features people and has proper faces and things like that. I've seen plenty of that as well, covered in places like Vice and Ars Technica and all the rest. So it's not... So there's some speculation. I think, Scarr, you mentioned this at the start, about some of the limitations that are being put on these things.
Yeah, it's sort of this idea that the publicly available versions have been trained on abstract art and, landscape art, but not on portraits, because they don't want people to be using it to just, generate faces at will and use them to scam credit cards or, put someone in a, compromising photograph or anything, which might seem ridiculous given the current output, but, it's a expanding industry, shall we say?
Perfectly possible.
A developing field, that's what we should say.
Deep fakes have been with us for quite a while now, and we've seen the uncanny likenesses that can be generated. No, there's definitely the potential here for that to happen. I do believe you're right that there's certain limitations put on free versions, but as far as I know, if you're willing to pay the monies, you will get the results. And there's certain sort of filters that I think are still being placed on some of the Stable Diffusion. I think it is has Stable Diffusion, Subtle Diffusion has some limitations on the sorts of. A quote that's kind of floating around in my mind is, yeah, no problem, we've got this subset of people who want to create gory art, but if we let this thing loose and allowed for those sorts of prompts, they block certain words, we'd just be swimming in a sea of it, which will bring me back to something that I think lies ahead of us, but we'll go there later. So Dave, you're reading it, you've got your hands on the stuff, and the art is imparting something about setting, and it sits alongside the words and mechanics. What do you think?
Yeah, okay, just flick up a random page. There's a 2-page spread of some skull turtle-y looking things staring at each other, and the first entry in one of the random tables is Cranium of a Colossal Sea Monster. And honestly, it fits.
I'm looking at it, actually. It's one of the images featured in this review. Yeah,
I mean, just glancing through it, there's nothing there that makes me go, oh, that's dumb, that shouldn't be here. No,
it could equally be a huge mound of rocks covered in toxic moss. Oh. It's sort of suggestive rather than explicitly pictorially figurative.
Well, I think this is why it might AI generated art might be especially useful for I think you mentioned before fantastical scenes. which don't necessarily have to sync up with what real-world biology or real-world physics might imply. And honestly, the sheer potential for giving ideas and inspiration is crazy, because the AIs will spit out images that would never be created by a human, just because the association there'll be associations which just would not occur to a human mind. And I think that could be a useful source of feedback of, like, say, oh, that's a cool idea. What does that character do? Or what lives in that land? Ooh.
Yeah, I think as a means of, so what you might describe as a discovery or exploration phase in terms of world building or, NPC creating or whatever. Absolutely. And let's just sort of parcel this out now. You're looking at a professional product or a semi-professional product that is being sold for money.
Yeah.
Now that means that the creator is taking in payment for this, is putting out content, but crucially, they haven't paid an artist, and they don't have to.
Yep.
They've probably paid to access the generation tool that gives them credits to put against iterating and reiterating as they refine prompts to get the outputs they're looking for. But crucially, they're not paying any artists, and they're not waiting a very long time to see drafts and compositions and results. And they're not having to write particularly detailed what traditionally would be artistic briefs. Instead, they write prompts.
And
I would highly suspect that those prompts include phrases like "in the style of," and then famous artists or recognizable artists.
Yeah.
Looking at this stuff, it is very evocative of some artists who would work in the fantastic.
Yep.
So that's, but that's a person they don't have to liaise with, instruct, or pay, which is a big. That's where we start to get into where I suppose we might start to draw battle lines around the whole idea of AI art in RPGs.
Well, the question I'd ask is the images that a particular AI art generating tool was trained on. Was every single image of that public domain or under some other license that allowed it to be used for whatever purpose?
Well, we know for a fact that no.
Yeah.
in both counts.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we can't. We don't have a framework of law that entirely covers what we're seeing here. And then there's anyone can go to an art gallery and be inspired by the greats and then go home and draw and paint and, yeah, sure, okay.
The devil's in the details there, though.
Go ahead.
Well,
devil me.
Yeah, well, yes, I mean, yeah, you could be inspired by looking at a piece of art. You might even take a photo of it, but you're not going to you're not going to have the physical capacity to look at the sheer amount of images that went into any of these commercially available tools and create the kind of connections between them that these tools can. Like, you're simply not going to be able to do it. Like, they can do they can look at more images than you've seconds in the day. And in extreme detail, for my limited understanding of how they actually work. So yeah, while technically it's yes, you could be inspired by an image, you can't be inspired in the same way, if you could even call it inspiration. Yeah.
Okay, so an inspired is sort of we edge into arguments about what is art and why we create anything. But let's face it, the person who wrote this book, Ashen Void, wouldn't necessarily have gone out looking for a big A artist to illustrate their work. They'd have gone looking for a commercial artist, someone who is turning out stuff to get paid to make rent. So do they necessarily need to be inspired, or do they simply have to follow the brief, which is in some sense exactly what these algorithms are doing? Have we stepped from the sacred to the profane, or are we still in the area of the commercial and the industrialized? And in the same way that, as you say, this thing can look at more images than you've got moments in the day. In the same way that my computer can crunch more numbers than I can add up in a lifetime, they can do it in a second, which is what allows it to do remarkable things for me that I absolutely benefit from and think nothing of exploiting. I have put how many actual human computers, which is where the word comes from, have I put out of business by employing the machine? Now I'm also playing devil's advocate here. I think there's some very tricky conversations to be had around this, but we should probably limit ourselves to just let's look at it from the different perspectives of the RPG industry and say, here's what's happening. So here's the bottom line today. If you are sitting on a dream project and the thing that's holding you back is I can't afford $5,000 worth of art to make this worth putting on Drive-Thru-RPG. Well, guess what? You can probably get it done for about 50 quid now. You just got to sit down and write the prompts, which is remarkable. Like, that's truly remarkable.
Well, it's sort of the scale question is like, yeah, let's assume, we can assume, and don't mean to use it as an example, but it's what we have in front of us. Ashen Void, would that have been made if it required a $5,000 art budget? Would that have crippled the product from ever appearing in the first place? You can easily see a situation where there's an awful lot of products that if AI art didn't exist, they wouldn't have come out, or they would have been released without any art. And that would have had, various knock-on effects for its saleability and, its aesthetic is where, aesthetic is much easier to communicate with pictures than with words. But at the same point, there's then the point of, well, that's fine and all, but the consumers see this art, and while some are inspired by this thing, I just see a whole bunch of lumpy shapes. I don't think this is real art. Maybe I'm lost as a customer. Whereas if a paid artist had been there, the lumpiness would have, possibly had some more humanist traits, and I would have been a customer for that. And then on the other hand, it's great for people without an art budget to suddenly have this means to produce their dream projects. That's absolutely a great thing. But then conversely, these are free or relatively inexpensive tools available to everyone. What's to stop people who would otherwise have spent thousands of dollars on art for their project from deciding to cut off these artists and, pay the machine rather than the people?
Yep, and here's the thing: it's the genie isn't going back into the bottle. But as Mick alludes to, there are some tough conversations to be had about in regards to AI generated creative works, and just in terms of this specific product, because it's in front of me, I'm going to be completely honest. The first thing that caught my eye was the cover art, as in, ooh, this looks cool, and read the prompt a bit and noticed it was on sale and decided, what, I'm going to get this.
And has your opinion of the cover changed at all? Now that you know that it bubbled up out of a big image set, what I suppose are fundamentally sort of molecular cut and paste collage techniques, and some writing prompts that perhaps called upon in the style of an artist, despite the fact that artist was neither consulted nor compensated.
The idea that the realization that AI generated art, does it in itself bother me? Like, I enjoying the art in the book. The idea that it's cribbing off a specific artist does bother me a bit. I will, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's sounding a bit like it. So yeah, it's less than ideal in that respect.
Yeah, we can't say for sure that it is any particular artist, although you can draw some vague kind of through lines depending on how well you know your art history or how familiar you are with a particular artist's output. You can kind of look at these things and go, oh, that sort of looks a bit like a Ross or a Caravaggio or a Reynolds.
Look through your local Taschen section of your bookstore, and it'll give you a list of possible comparisons to make.
But I think it's fair to say that, yes, this is potentially technology that lifts an awful lot of projects that are sitting as Word documents into the realm of the possible. You can now get this on. It'll look just like a real RPG book, full colour throughout, and you didn't have to pay thousands. And it is a big hurdle. Art is expensive.
Oh yeah,
it's way more expensive than layout. It's really expensive. Hire good layout people.
Especially if you want art that from somebody who's got a bit of a name and is in demand, or if you want large pieces, God help you.
Like 2-page spreads. That's a lot to ask for. Now let's go to the home game. You're a GM. You have a limited amount of time to prep your game, and you've got a bunch of NPCs, and you'd really like to show your players who they are. This is a great tool again. You can go throw, $15 a month, whatever, to get a Midjourney account, and you can have it populate. I want to see 5 examples of a crooked old washerwoman with an evil gleam in her eye. Boom. You've got 5 to pick from. You might have 50 to pick from. And the one that suits you best will be, front and center on your table tonight. Sort of printed out for the players to go, she seems harmless, but I don't know about her. Conveying exactly the emotion, sort of the intent you wanted.
I would trust her, but she seems to have 3 extra elbows for some reason. So maybe we should suspect her being a mutant.
Yes, I think you've got
some selective cropping would be a wise idea there. I think,
assuming it even had a face. But I've seen a variety of things that suggest to me that with the right prompts, you can definitely get recognizable and credible faces out of this. It's not actually as much of a hurdle as it was for something like Deep Dream only a few years ago.
Oh God, Deep Dream, that was some trippy stuff. But the other thing
again for the home GM who's setting up a game, who's just needs something and can't quite find it by searching through old Icewind Dale character portraits. This is another place it could shine.
Absolutely. The other thing to bear in mind, this technology is only going to improve. It's only going to be tweaked and added to over time. So what's commercially or even freely available right now might be utterly passé within a year.
Yeah, players obviously benefit the same way. They can if, with no artistic talent whatsoever, they can probably get the AI to generate a perfect rendition of their character who just happens to be a cybergoth femme fatale. You might not even pay for that. Just search for AI output on Google Image. Which this is tangential to what we've talked about. I think it can't actually. One thing I've discovered is it's not very good at generating maps. It doesn't have a good sense of. It has a sense of what maps should kind of look like, but it's not actually very good at generating, say, a dungeon floor plan that you'd be able to use without having to go in there and severely sort of crop and edit. It has trouble with that. Jazza, who has a very popular YouTube art channel, played around with this, came to broadly similar conclusions. However, towards the end of his video, I'll throw a link somewhere, he makes the observation that it's a very good tool for creating elements for, say, a board game or a UI for a computer game. He shows examples of things like a magical sort of rainbow donut, say that could represent a mana point or whatever, and it can give him 50 examples very quickly, and they're all perfectly good. All you got to do is crop that to a JPEG, insert it into your game, or use it on a token, and you haven't had to pay an artist. So I think board game people might be kind of the sort of dark horse beneficiaries of some of this stuff. Like token stuff could be or UI element stuff could be very, very easy to generate using this sort of technology. Next Candy Crush game, all the elements might be entirely AI generated. I mean, this gem or that gem, who cares? I mean, there's thousands of examples of what gems should look like to train on.
Yeah, I can definitely see King Publishing deciding to skip a bit of their art budget that way.
That expensive art budget.
So, programming is never desperately cheap, but once you've got the base program for making a Match 3 game, you can add in some variations and things, but it's not going to cost you a huge amount. But artwork is fantastically expensive for companies like that, and they are, of course, looking to cut corners and costs wherever they can.
Recycling art.
Recycling. It is a little bit... So, this is not germane to the point of this episode, sorry folks, but I have a prediction. I have a weird sort of grey goo future prediction to make. Because as we've sort of skirted around and talked about, all of the art that these algorithms are trained on is art by real people. Just about all of it. Because this didn't exist 5 years ago. So we've got millions of pictures, millions of examples of fantasy landscapes and dragons and cybergoth femme fatales and kind of brooding heroes and any other thing you want to name. We've got loads and loads of examples of them. But the entire output of every jobbing fantasy RPG and otherwise artist for the last, let's say, the genre has been sort of pumping out high quality art since Frank Frazetta was doing his thing, so it's about 50 years worth, a bit more. That is going to be subsumed within a year by AI generated art that is aping all of those things. So what is your seed stock is now going to be 1% of 1% of the seed stock upon which the algorithms start to feed. What I think that results in is you will get increasingly generic outputs. It won't matter what prompt you put in. You'll start to get very, very generic outputs. Things will start to sort of trend towards whatever the AI considers the most optimal forms. And I suspect it will poison the well. What you'll have to start doing is, we're having arguments about whether we should be restricting it to, as you say, maybe public domain or vetted sample sets, or should artists be allowed to say, I don't want to be included in your AI training sample sets. What we'll find instead is that you're going to spend even more time weeding out AI generated art, because it's like photocopying. You can only really sort of put it through the ringer so many times before you just start to get faded, mangled versions of itself. What do you think about that?
That has a very interesting point.
I'll try not to be depressed by it.
Well, it will re-up the value of human art.
I would hope so, but I could see some sort. I could not necessarily an alternative to what you're suggesting, but I could see a form of natural selection, a form of selection occurring where people gravitate towards the more impressive art, because there's so maybe not all of the AI art is going to trend towards the generic, but that's I could absolutely see that happening.
It's kind of it's market forces, and it's the statistical sort of nature of the model. Like, why does a lot of manga look the same? Because it has kind of trended from quite idiosyncratic artists towards what will sell, towards we need to pump out lots of this, towards tracing and doing what the other guy does because it's selling. Now, obviously, there's always people that come along and buck the trend, but they are deliberately doing so. They're doing so with intent, and AI-generated art at this point, I'm not sure is capable of looking around the room and going, I'm going the other direction.
Yeah.
That's still
probably not.
Like right now,
insurrection is still quite human.
Yeah. Right now, the AI art phenomenon is novel simply because of its own novelty. And, as I say, you get these people with no faces and 3 elbows in each arm. But it still looks cool and aesthetic and inspires people to make OSR supplements. But that's the current vibe of it. In a year, when it, as you say, the snake starts eating its own tail, people might start getting very leery about it and want the more human art again. Well, I just could hope. Like, it's sort of the where does the good enough line land, and that's something we're going to have to discover as a species over the next few years. Speaking as someone who's done a bit of this, machine learning and AI visualization sorting stuff as part of my job, like, one of the big things that really sets a good machine learning project up from a bad one is setting your initial conditions and pruning your work. Like, going through the iterative process of saying, well, we did this and we got this output. We did this and we got that output. How do we adjust our training set? How much do we verify, and how much do we prune what we got to whatever parameters? It's a process that ultimately does require human oversight to get good results. And then the question is, when do you stop? When do you say, I just want 50,000 washerwomen with no faces? And
curation is key, I think. I'm absolutely certain that Mr. Albert Rakowski, who wrote and released and generated Ashen Void, assuming they're in fact not a brain in a jar somewhere, they should be proud of themselves. They've released a product. They've got a book out. They've got their ideas out in the world.
Yeah.
I've no doubt that they looked at a lot of different versions of the cover and the spreads and had to make that human decision that it's this and not that. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't. I'm not for a second suggesting that they just took the first thing the computer gave them and went with that.
Very clearly, the author of Ashen Void had an aesthetic in their head, and the best way to express that aesthetic was to refer to the machine rather than, as I say, wrangle with an artist for months, getting a whole bunch of trial pieces and, having to turn what was in their head into a whole bunch of compromises. Now, we could argue, again, we have a completely separate argument about, whether compromise is good for art or not, but we're already pushing half an hour.
Just to cycle back, the Polish artist I referenced at the start, who's a lot of this Ashen Void stuff kind of reminds me of, is one, excuse me, Polish listeners, Zdzislaw Beksinski, who died in 2005. Dystopian surrealism was his oeuvre, and if you've seen something that looks like a skull with a lot of knuckles playing a flute, then you're probably on the right path. I think a lot of this stuff is kind of evocative of his style, Geiger's style. Hieronymus Bosch does that kind of. You can get away with a lot of. There he is, yeah. It's just Dave has posted the link. You can get away with a lot if you abandon traditional anatomy. We've waxed quite lyrically on this one at length. I know for a fact some of you folks out there in listener land, I've stopped calling you readers because I'm trying to catch up, know a hell of a lot more about this subject than I do, and we'd love to meet you on the Discord. You can point out cool stuff you've seen, where you think it's going. I'd love to hear some other points of view on if the sheer volume of stuff that's about to be produced by AI artists is going to poison the well in terms of samples, or in terms of the market itself. Are we just going to become so, I can tell by the pixels, no human touched this? Is that where we're going as an audience? But yeah, see us there. Dave, any final thoughts? You want to take us out?
Any final thoughts? Like with a whole pile of other evolving technologies, the entire swathe of consequences of and benefits of the technology are yet to be seen. But into the future we go.
Right, Scarr, will you be algorithmically generating your next RPG?
I've got far too many ideas of my own. I am an algorithm all my own for dumb ideas.
We won't talk about it, but we should point out that there are AI dungeon masters being worked on at the moment. That's a topic for another time.
Yeah, that is sort of The great benefit of AI is to give people access to not only products or images or art, but services that they can't get. Just they don't know any artists. They don't know how to make professional connections to artists, or they don't have the budget for artists. And for that sort of market, or they don't have a dungeon master, they'd like an AI dungeon master. All that stuff is great for the person who doesn't have access. But the problem is that those same tools could, in theory, be used against the legitimate people who could use certain services. And that's a motif you're going to be hearing a lot more of in the next couple of years as these kinds of service constraints. Is it good? Is it bad? That's something for history to decide, and we're currently in that history. We're not looking backwards to give our opinions. We are in the middle of it. So if you've got strong thoughts on these are the years when you should be making them known. On our Discord if you want.
Absolutely. Come and speculate wildly with us. So far, I've heard no good AI-generated podcasts that sound anywhere near as incoherent as us. So,
they only have 700 episodes to train the data set on.
How would that go? Those conversations would be wild.
The absolute babble.
It's probably coming next.
It would keep mixing up the two Shanes, and I would
presumably you could replace most of talk radio with AI generated arguments. All right. On that note, as we swing wildly into the future, not really knowing whose job is next, let's just say that for now, this party's over. Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.